do. Welcome, everyone. Excited to have you today. We're going to get started in just a minute. And in the meantime, if you'd like to share where you're calling in from and maybe a few words about how you're feeling, and then we'll kick things off.
I'm calling in from Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Yay, Canada. That's exciting.
Yeah.
I'm in Central North Carolina.
Oh, cool. Close to you, Claire.
I'm actually on page 28 of Michael's book because
Awesome.
Jenna Free did an interview with me about my Death Cafe.
Hi, Sarah.
I had to throw that in.
I love it.
I don't have a camera, but I'm calling in from Evansville, Indiana. I'm Jillian.
Welcome. Great. Well, I'm going to kick things off, and if people just want to feel free to write in the chat if you want to still share where you're calling in from. Well, welcome to Holding Space with Claire Bidwell Smith and Michael Hebb. My name is Derek Hosberg. I'm the program director at Reimagine. And as a nonprofit organization, we spark community experiences like this one that empowers individuals, families, and communities to face the hardest parts of our existence, including serious illness and death, while inspiring people to celebrate life and one another. Before we get going, I just wanted to express our profound gratitude to our festival sponsors who support Reimagine and make this work possible. In addition to all of your donations, everything makes a big difference, so thank you. And before introducing Claire, I just want to make sure everybody is acclimated to Zoom. These are my cats, Sammy and Biscuit, who are showing that you can turn on and off your mic, which will keep the mics off until the Q&A. And then you can turn off your camera, but we recommend keeping it on as a way to feel more connected. And you can ask questions or make comments throughout the session. We will be having Q&A around 30 minutes into the program. And if you are finding the chat distracting, you can always close it by clicking the little arrow at the top. And with that, I just am going to introduce Claire. Claire Bidwell Smith is an internationally renowned author, speaker, and grief expert. And she's the author of 3 books of nonfiction, The Rules of Inheritance, After This, When Life is Over, Where Do We Go? And Anxiety, The Missing Stage of Grief. And with that, I will pass it off to you, Claire.
Thank you, Dara. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here today. This is really one of my favorite times of the week. I love coming together with all of you and with our guests. For those of you who are new this week, I started hosting these conversations when the pandemic broke out, just as a way to hold space for all the big stuff we were feeling, all the grief, the anxiety, the uncertainty, and just bringing on a new and interesting guest every week in the death and dying space to talk with us. This week, I am so excited to have Michael Hebb with us. Michael is a partner at Round Glass and the founder of the new EOL community, which we're going to talk about, and I'm really excited about, and also Death Over Dinner. He is the author of Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner. And before COVID could be found traveling the world, speaking at TEDMed, the Obama Foundation Summit, South by Southwest, and the World Economic Forum. His writings have appeared in various publications, including USA Today, GQ, and Food and Wine. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Claire. I love that we get to spend this time together. So
Me too.
Yeah.
But I would love for you to start by just having you tell us all about yourself and how you got to be where you are and all your kind of amazing things that you've created.
Wow, that's a tall order. Let's see. I think for today, let's focus on how loss has really had a major impact in my life, and grief, and turning both loss and grief into something really powerful and meaningful. And I think we have a choice, actually, when it comes to when we face something very difficult. We can either contract or expand. And I was reminded, this week is the week that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, we celebrated the day of her death, the anniversary of her death on Monday. And she spoke and wrote so brilliantly about this response to grief, this response to loss, to anything challenging, and we can respond via fear or love. And we have a choice there. Sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes we don't know how to access love, and that's okay too. But I experienced a lot of loss in childhood. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when I was in second grade. And we dealt with it terribly as a family. And I say that compassionately, but it's also a fact. And my mother was very overwhelmed. My older brother, very angry and overwhelmed. My father, very confused. Alzheimer's was a new phenomenon. We didn't know about dementia. And so we had to educate ourselves about dementia and in the middle of the hurricane. And we really, our family was really broken apart. It was almost like this slow motion bomb going off at the center of our family. And we went to our various corners in the house, our various corners in the world, trying actually to stay distant from each other, which was a really, probably a smart thing to do. If someone can't give you the nurturing that you need, it probably shouldn't be who you spend the most time with. But nonetheless, my father ended up dying when I was 13, and he died on Halloween. And I woke up in the middle of the night the moment he died, even though he was 20 miles away from me. Didn't know why I was awake. And then went back to sleep, woke up later that day in the morning, and just knew that he was gone. And I spent, I went to school that day, because when you're 13, what else are you gonna do? So I went to school and I didn't tell anybody. I looked around, I think quite consciously looked around my community and realized that no one could hold that weight. And it's a terrible thing to hand something of great weight to somebody and have them drop it. And I didn't think that anybody in my friend group or mentor group, there weren't any adults or friends around me that I felt like could actually be with me with the fact that my father had died that morning. And I went out on Halloween and did what 13-year-old kids do and drank, some 13-year-old kids, and TP'd houses and, were terrible shits. And I remember very, very distinctly this first clear separation between me and my peers. I started seeing me and seeing them from a step removed, this kind of chasm. And then for a while, there was a lot of pain in that disconnection. And I started writing poetry, and I started crying a lot, and I started spending a lot of time alone in nature, but just really didn't know what to do with the pain, and ultimately started asking really important questions. Questions about spirituality, questions about mysticism, about what real connection looks like, what healing is about, and became kind of entranced with Eastern spirituality and mysticism and meditation at a very young age. And so it became, and then started to call in some really extraordinary mentors into my life. And so it is one of those things where something very terrible happened, and then it started to be a very positive impact in my life. And I'm glad I kind of separated from the herd early on, It wasn't until much later that death, I guess, chose me once again. And that was about 8 or 9 years ago. And I had spent many, many years gathering remarkable individuals around the dinner table to have really difficult conversations. I wanted to know why the dinner table, how it worked, how it was such an important and misunderstood or not even a thing that people were curious about, like an engine of culture. Like, why do we take this for granted when the dinner table and convening around food is one of the most important things that we do and always has been. From the mundane and everyday to the really extraordinary. And I wanted to know how it's used. And I learned that people in positions of power want to have real conversations. They want to talk about the hardest stuff, but people don't often ask them hard questions. They can become very mediated, very safe, very moderated, very, put into very controlled environments. And what I realized is powerful people and artists and creators, and they want to talk about real shit. And so started to have some really hard conversations about war and about genocide and about racism and about homelessness, and then decided that I wanted to have everybody be able to have hard and transformative conversations. But dinner tables don't get better when they get longer. And so how could we scale this really important container that is dinner? And that's where Death Over Dinner came from.
And what year was that when you started it?
We launched it 7 years and 3 days ago. We launched it on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's the anniversary of her death, in collaboration with the EKR Foundation and National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. And there were 500 dinners on one night on August 24th, 7 years ago, in 20 countries, over 500 dinners. And then since then, there have been about 1 million people who've sat down and had these conversations. So yeah, it led to a lot of things. I'm sure we'll talk about EOL a little bit, but
For those here who aren't familiar with Death Over Dinner or haven't been to one, set it up for us, describe it for us. If we were coming tonight to when was no longer COVID and we were actually gathering for dinners again.
Yeah. So you would have gotten a very strange invitation. If you're here in this conversation today, you probably wouldn't have thought that it was that strange, but but you would have gotten a very strange invitation from someone in your life that said, I want to have this experience called Death Over Dinner, and it's a movement, and it's okay if you don't want to come, but if you come, here's some homework, here's something to read, watch, and listen, and we're going to have a really beautiful evening. And then people would show up, and they'd be a little bit uncomfortable, and they might have a glass of wine to ease their anxiety, or might start just breathing deeper. and then you sit around the table, and we would have provided you with a script for the evening so that there's no need to worry or second guess. It's like a board game. And it's a board game that's been customized by your host because they tell us why they want to have this dinner. And based upon why you want to have the dinner, there's about 8 different intentions that are very different. Like, I've just lost somebody, or I have a loved one in the ICU, or I want to plan about, think about death because I'm a young family, or I'm spiritually interested or philosophically interested in the topic. Those create very different board games. But the dinners always start with, regardless of your intention, they would start with acknowledging a loved one who's no longer with us and had a positive impact on your life. People light a candle for that person, which changes the feeling of the table immediately. You're immediately not in 2020, you're in some sort of timeless space, and it might feel like the ancestors are in the room. And then there's 3 to 5 questions that really reveal people to themselves. And that's the idea. Idea with Death Over Dinner is to reduce the distance between us and also the distance between ourselves internally. And it works really well. It works like magic, and everyone responds to these questions. It's usually a self-selecting group that come to a dinner, so you don't get people that are deeply resistant. You get people that are slightly resistant, and which is great. And then you can see whole family dynamics change in an evening. It really, and I say this knowing that you're a therapist, but it really is a very simple model of group therapy. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
You and I have similar backgrounds, personal backgrounds. Both of my parents got cancer at the same time when I was 14. And my mom died when I was 18 and my dad when I was 25. I'm an only child. My mom, we had a terrible death. It was not a good death. None of us were ready for it. We didn't face it. We didn't talk about it. She tried treatment after treatment after treatment up until the end, and died in a really uncomfortable state, and not in a way that I think that she maybe would have wanted under other circumstances. My father had a very different death. He chose hospice. He wanted to be at home. He was very present to it. He asked me to be very present to his death. Those two experiences for me really informed the work I do today, which I think is similar to yours, in that, just really wanting to create space for people to talk about death, to understand it, to move into it. And I sounds like you really come to it from the experience you had with your family. What do you think it would have been like? I feel like in the last 20 years, things have changed so much. My mom died 23 years ago. And when she died, there was nothing like this. There was no Death Over Dinner. There were no death cafes. There was no Modern Loss. There was no Endwell. There just weren't all the amazing things that there are today. And I think that we really are changing the conversation, all of us. What do you think it would have been like for you had there been more of this?
Yeah, well, there would have been a lot less pain.
Mm-hmm.
The primary thing that I think would have changed would be that there would be less shame. And that's you can't take the suffering out of these experiences.
Mm-hmm.
They just suck, right? We love people, and then we lose them. And that's always going to be terrible. And people are like, you kind of make it sound like death is cool. And it's like, that's not cool. That's terrible. I don't even like the word the good death. I don't like that terminology. I don't know how to call it. Death it's not good or bad. It definitely is painful, but there are layers of suffering that we can avoid. And there's opportunity for healing that we can take advantage of. So one thing that would be missing, hopefully, and what I want missing for people and why I built Death Over Dinner is to take the shame away. And shame shuts us down. And shame, when we're being shamed or when we're feeling shame, we quite physically can't and mentally can't learn. We can't evolve. Our curiosity is gone. We are shut down by it. And so it's kind of like a dead state when you're being shamed. So the opposite of vitality. And it really became this shameful thing because we couldn't talk about it. And it was a reality and it was happening. And we were made to feel weird about it. And then shameful. And then the nursing home that I had to go to see my father and spend time with him was so awful. And I was so ashamed that he had to be in this was an extraordinary man. This was a man with a tremendous amount of dignity. And the moral distress of seeing my father in a place that had no dignity, something that still is really, really painful for me. And a lot of people are still, our work's not done, as we know so well.
Mm-hmm.
These resources are out there, but are people resourced, is a different question. There are ways to get literate, but are people literate? There are ways to be empowered, but are they empowered? And So we still have such a tremendous amount of work to do. But the other thing missing was connection and healing. So like that fear or love, expansion or contraction, opportunity, when something like this happens, death is such an illness, is such a tremendous opportunity for connection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, such a great opportunity to heal other wounds, and to even generationally heal. But so that's what I would hope, that it could actually bring our family closer together. You know, that sucks, but maybe it gives us that.
Yeah. I love the way you're talking about shame. I felt a lot of shame about my grief. I felt like my grief went on for too long, was too big, was too messy, affected too many parts of my life, and that there was just something wrong with me for it all. And I just felt so much shame around that. And it wasn't until I really started to do this work that I understood that my grief was normal, you know. But previous to that, I really thought there was something wrong with me. What was your grief like for your dad in that process?
It was almost like the opposite. Because I didn't have any place to share it or experience it, and friendships that I felt like could hold it, I felt ashamed that I wasn't more in touch with it. And that, you know, and it's kind of, it's a little bit classic, but in the, you know, male female to some extent, but I felt like there was something wrong with me because I wasn't more impacted, and I didn't know how to get down into it. And then when I actually did, I was when it hit me, it really hit me, and I was in a this terrible breakup conversation with the woman who ended up, you know, being the mother of my daughter, my first daughter, but at the time we were breaking up. And we're in the middle of talking about our we're 21, like our 21-year-old dramas, and how she hurt me or I hurt her, and that we were going to end it. And then all of a sudden I just lost it and crying uncontrollably. And I felt really bad for her because she was like, what? This seems like an outsized response. And it was. And I was like, I'm sorry, but I'm actually I need to just now grieve my father. And you, like, whatever made it okay in that moment. And it was the hardest that I'd cried since I was, you know, 6 or 7. And it went on for a long, long time. And I felt so much better. It's like, this is the best breakup. I got to grieve my father, and, you know, we got to some clarity.
I love that. Tell us a little bit about your connection with your dad today. It sounds like you've really gone through some just spiritual quests. I kind of feel like I feel like this is an added stage or phase of grief, is like we go on a spiritual quest to understand death, you know, because we want so much to understand where our person is and what is our connection to them. And it's just kind of a natural part of grieving, I think, to start to really think about these things. What's that been like for you?
Well, you know, my dad was 72 when I was born. But he was a very clear 72-year-old, very vital. And I was the last of 50 years of baby making.
I thought my dad was old. My dad was 57 when I was born. But
yeah.
72 that's something else.
Yeah. Yeah. He was born in 1904 during the Yukon Gold Rush. And he hadn't had a child yet, I think, that was more like him in temperament. And so we were kind of inseparable. You know, and I think for once he had time to be with his child, time, and then the desire. Like, my brother was 3 years older, but my brother kind of drove him crazy because he was like a little ADD or something. And I was pretty calm and a little bit philosophic just in general. And so we were like two old men together. And and then when he died, I mean, like I was very connected to his death, and I felt him very present to me. And I would say, and I'd feel like he's here. And I'd call him in for every death dinner, and felt like I could feel his warmth and his presence, and I needed that, quite frankly, because like I said, the family was pretty much destroyed. I was a little bit left with this friendly ghost, and at a certain point, it was actually it started from an ayahuasca ceremony, where we had a very long conversation. And he was like, yeah, I died because I wanted you to be the man that you needed to be, and I needed to get out of the way. And a lot could be said about that conversation. And we had this, and we were like laughing together. And I got to thank him. I was like, that was an incredibly generous thing to do. And so we had this real communion in an ayahuasca ceremony, however you may or may not feel about that. But what it did clarify for me was I could actually let him go. That maybe I had been clutching on to his presence a bit too tightly. And then maybe he needed permission, maybe spirits, maybe our ancestors need permission to go wherever's next. Just like they definitely need permission when they're at the end of their life, we need to let people know it's okay to die. People will stay alive and in misery, or just alive longer at the end if they don't clearly know from their loved ones that it's okay. And perhaps, hard to know, but perhaps spirits feel the same way. And so I've been actively, and it's really, I can't talk about it too much because I'll start crying, but it's really hard thing to do, to start inviting him to go if he needs to.
I've done some of that work around my mom. I did some shamanic work when I was working on my second book, which is all about our connections to the afterlife and how it affects our grieving. But I got into this really awesome shamanism situation. And I also felt like what happened was I needed to let go of my mom. And I also felt like she needed to let go of me. It kind of was determined by the shamans and by the journey I went on that we had each taken a piece of each other. I kept a piece of her here, she took a piece of me there, and we were both kind of stuck from it, Yeah. And so I've done a lot of work around that. But it's so emotional, it's so intense, but also so beautiful and important.
Yeah. I feel like I have this like blanket from childhood, and people are like, we're gonna just take the blanket from you now. I'm like, no. It's like, it might be time. So.
But you've done incredible things in the world as a result of this loss. You've created so much community and change and healing for people. You did one of my favorite things that's happened during the pandemic. When the pandemic happened, you brought together everybody in the death and dying space. And we met on Zoom twice a week for what was that, 8 weeks? I met all these people I didn't know about, had never met. We were coming together, all of us, every week and trying to figure out how can we best support all the people in the world that are about to go through so much grief and loss. And it was really one of the most kind of profound experiences of the pandemic for me. So I thank you for that. Tell us about your new project, EOL. This is also another mind-blowing creation of yours.
Well, yeah, I mean, and briefly to touch on the COVID paper and that virtual funeral community that came together. I mean, and we can maybe share it in chat, because covidpaper.org is very much a living, breathing resource for people. But that came from a kind of middle of the night realization, and just feeling through that people are going to die alone. The people always have died alone, and people are always afraid of dying alone, but now everybody was going to die alone. And we like to talk about, or not like to, but we talk about the 1,000 to 1,500 people dying a day from COVID. There's in the US, there's 6,000 to 7,000 other people dying every day in the US already. So all of those people were, I felt them being alone in their hospital beds and felt their families on the other side of a screen, not even a window, right? They weren't allowed in the hospitals in many cases. And then the inability to grieve, to be at funerals, to that skin hunger that we feel, like you can't even give somebody a hug at a funeral, if there even was a funeral. And that, that wasn't okay. That's not okay with me. And so I called Candy Can from Baylor and said, we have to do something about it. And you know how to do big, important things like white papers. I know how to convene people and, get them to open their hearts. And so let's do that together. And she was like, yes. So we did. So, I mean, I'll be touched by that forever, but, and thank you for being part of it. So yeah, I think that the new project, which is just eol.community, and everybody's invited, that grew out of this realization. We started Death Over Dinner, and which was great. And we're like 80% of people want to die at home, and only 20% do, and we're gonna change that, right? Like, rah rah. And we're gonna get everyone to talk about death, and then they're gonna have a plan. It was like we were saying, hey, you're gonna come to this great party and it's gonna be amazing. And then people are like, where's the party? And we're like, there's no party. Talk about death, get okay with it, make a plan. Where do we make a plan? I can't tell you. And so we were like, people need a place to create a plan, and they need more than that. They need more than a checklist. They need a place that has all of the best providers and practitioners in the end-of-life space right there ready to take care of them. They need a community that they can talk to immediately online, as a social media environment, as a social network. They need to be able to find the best concentrated wisdom about memory care, about palliative care, about death doulas, about grief therapists. They need to be able to find a grief therapist in the same place where they can get their will done. And they need to have a place where the whole family can do it together, and a whole group of people can do it together. So we ended up creating this really long list of things that we needed to create before we felt like it was an actual resource. Death Over Dinner is a whole complete experience. It works, but I was like, I don't want to do this piecemeal. It needs to be free, and it needs to be abundant, and it needs to be comprehensive, and it needs to be beautiful, and it's going to take a lot of money to get this done and done right. And so that's where Sunny Singh came into my life, who's a billionaire healthcare data founder who got pretty sick, and then decided he wanted to get well, and realized how hard it is to get well when you're sick. It's one thing to have acute things, like our sick care system, not our healthcare system, is very good at acute systems. But if we just want it to get well, we're kind of in the wilderness. And so he decided to take his massive wealth and focus it on getting people well before they get sick. And so we started working together, and he said, yeah, this is my give back to the world. So you need a lot of resources, and I have them. You have the vision. Build what you've been dreaming of, and do it. Take 10 years, do it right. Do it slowly. Don't worry about the business model of it, et cetera. And so that's what we've done. We built EOL, and it feels like a joyful place, and it feels like a meaningful place. And there are thousands of people using it all of the time, like right now. And we launched 3 weeks ago. So I'm pretty happy.
Amazing. Wait till you guys check it out if you haven't already. It's so beautiful and just well designed. And I'm so excited about having this resource for the world. This is the kind of stuff too that my family needed, when we were going through our experiences that so many families out there need.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing is it's not just we're not in a silo. We're working with every major end of life focused organization and association I can imagine. But we're working with the Association of Professional Chaplains, and they're on as a partner, and they're like, every chaplain needs to be able to, share this with the families. We're working with the Cleveland Clinic and their end of life center. And they're like, we need to prescribe this the way that we would prescribe medication. And I was like, okay, if we can get to that point, all of this goodness, all of the doulas, all of the chaplains, all of the grief therapists that, want to help people, but don't know how to get to the people that are in pain. Like, if we can bridge that, then it's going to work for a long, long time. And it's going to reduce a lot of suffering.
Thank you for creating this, Michael. You guys feel free to start putting some questions in the chat or come on video if you want to talk to Michael or ask him a question. In the meantime, Michael, what are your thoughts at this point, this far into the pandemic, about people who are still dying alone and people who can't, their loved ones who can't be with them, and these frontline healthcare workers who are really doing such amazing work to kind of try to bridge that gap in any way they can?
Well, I think we're it's hard for me to talk about the actual patient experience, because I think that, is probably getting better in bits and pieces, but still it's tragic. The thing that gives me hope is that we right now are in a massive adaptive valley of learning. And everything that's happening right now, and all of those frontline workers and all of the end of life workers that are sitting in this moment in time are being formed by this moment in time. And we are going to be so much better at taking care of everyone because of right now. Mm-hmm. And I think about that in the way I think about like the AIDS pandemic, the AIDS crisis. The people that most move me, who have been my greatest teachers in this space, the Frank Ostaszewskis of the world, the Ira Byoks, Katie Butler, Ram Dass. These are people who were formed in the AIDS crisis. Right. That's where they were magnetized to it. That's where they learned to take care of people and listen. And because of that, we're here, right? Like, we're on the shoulders of these giants who are on the shoulders of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and, and on it goes. But now there's an army of us. And so I'm really excited to see 5 years, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, how the future of death is actually being, and the future of compassionate care is being formed right now in this very scary adaptive valley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's so many hard things happening right now in the world, but I think there's going to be so much that comes out of this experience that will benefit us, that we will grow from, that we will learn about ourselves and how to take care of each other better. Whole infrastructures are falling apart, but we're going to have to rebuild them in new ways that are so much better, Talk to me a little bit about the racial disparity in healthcare right now, which is something that's becoming so illuminated in such an incredible way. I think that this is an exciting change that's happening, and we're just talking about it in ways that I've never heard anybody talk about it. What are you seeing on your end in that regard?
Yeah, thank God that it is top of mind. And it is not something that I've just started to educate myself on the racial disparity at end of life. I've been educating myself on systemic racism for a long time. And even for me, somebody who's been involved in that work and educating myself and that awareness, it wasn't until COVID that I actually thought about it all that much in the same way. And now to have people's attention on it, I think it's, I've been spending some time with Oceana Sawyer, who's a great death doula, and she's like, let's create the new reality where everyone is taken care of. Let's play together powerfully and do work together, but let's get into starting envisioning what that new paradigm looks like. And so I'm excited to, there's a few projects that we have right now that are looking specifically at how we do transform the experience for BIPOC and queer communities around end of life. So, and that might be the, if the AIDS crisis gave us this compassionate care model and this connection to Buddhism and presence and many, many things integrated into how we think about end of life. If one of our gifts from COVID is equality and inclusiveness in end of life experience, and to have those voices and those experiences shift the way that we talk about grief. Because we talk a lot about grief, but we mostly talk about white grief. We don't talk about Latinx grief or Black grief anywhere near as much. And so our systems of understanding, our systems of therapy are based so much on, a type of narrative and experience. Like, can't wait to see what that looks like.
Yeah. Even the education system, I've been reflecting back on my master's degree and everything I learned in counseling and psychology, and just how it was all for white people. There was nothing there that taught me about other experiences.
I had this amazing experience in Australia. I was there launching Death Over Dinner Australia with literally all of the top healthcare leaders in Australia. We became a national conversation in Australia, doing this like media junket, blah, blah, blah. But there was this one event that they were really nervous about. And that was with Aboriginal leaders. And just they've, for a lot of reasons, a fraught relationship between white leadership and Aboriginal leadership in Australia. And they were like trying to prep me for this, and they were clearly visibly nervous, the people that were hosting this. And I got into a room with about 100 Aboriginal leaders in some, ballroom in some hotel somewhere in Sydney. And, some hard looks my direction as I got up on that stage. I give my talk, and I'm trying to be charming and trying to be heart open and tell them stories that matter. And it's just going nowhere. Like the countenance towards me hasn't changed at all. It was just like, this is not working. And so I stopped my talk mid-talk, and I was like, okay, something here isn't right. Like, I'm talking about a basic human experience that's not resonating with this room, and that's okay. But tell me why. If you would do me the honor of telling me why, I'd really appreciate it. Let's maybe have a conversation about that. And the woman, says, well, first off, the name. And I was like, the name? She says, yeah, let's have dinner and talk about death. And I was like, okay, the name. She's like, we don't talk about death. I was like, okay, well, what do you talk about? She says, we talk about going home. I was like, okay, great, going home. And I was like, what else? And someone was like, dinner. That's a gubba word. And which I think, meant white person. And I was like, okay, it's a gubba word. What do you have? And they said, we have feeds. And I was like, okay, you have feeds. And I was like, what happens at a feed? And they're like, someone's like, starts laughing. It's like, we tell yarns. And I was like, okay, so yarns and their stories, and like the whole room is now alive. And I was like, well, what about we change the name from a yarn and a feed, or a feed and a yarn about going home? And like everybody was in. And like, okay, well, you don't need to hear from me anymore. Why don't we break into groups and tell me what should be in this platform that's a yarn and a feed about going home? And the organizers were like, how did this happen? I was like, well, how could you not ask some basic questions?
That's
Right?
awesome.
So
That's really great. I love that. Monica has a really great question here. She says, how do you create a safe space for people who are not spiritual, are possibly atheists, do not believe in an afterlife, and state that their view is that death and dying is a natural part of life?
That's great. There's no, I don't see any problem there, because the great part about a conversation about death is it's 100% not about death, it's about life. And there are no experts on death on the other side. And these conversations, death dinners, are almost never about religious beliefs or even spiritual beliefs. They're really about priorities for how people want to live. It's about grief, and it's about how people want to live and how they want their last chapter to be. And I've had a lot of concern taking this into different faith groups, but I've had dinners with the Mormon leadership in Salt Lake City. I've had dinners with Episcopal leadership. I've had dinners in the Deep South with Southern Baptists, where politics and religion and how we could see each other was a question whether we could. I remember having a dinner with Amy Grant, the Christian singer, and her husband Vince Gill, and a bunch of good old boys in Nashville. And I was like, how are we going to do this? Our politics and our religion, how are we going to have this dinner? It was still pretty early in death dinner. And we all fell in love. Like, we just fell in love with each other. And what I saw was, this is way below the waterline of religion or politics. It's in the human terrain, where we just want to connect with other humans. And so I found that these conversations don't alienate, aren't divisive. They just connect. And people are so beautiful when they're talking about, how they want to live.
Mm-hmm. What are some questions we can all be thinking about, like on our own, to stimulate some of these conversations or thoughts? How can we, you have a whole book about this, right?
Well, I think sometimes when you get the death bug or the end of life bug, you're a bit like a new convert, right? And you think everybody should be talking about end of life. You think everybody should having the conversation. You can't believe that they can't. And some people stay very focused on that for a long time. And so we end up having these conversations a lot from that perspective of it being transactional or directional without realizing it. And it's for the best possible type of transaction. I get it. You want people to have these conversations and think about these things because you care about them. But if you're going to your spouse or your parents and you're getting the resistance, like my spouse, my husband, my wife, they don't want to have the conversation. They won't talk about it. My parents, they won't talk about it. If you're making that statement, I would get internally suspicious and say, is it that they won't talk about it, or they won't talk to me about it in the way that I'm trying to talk to them about it? And start to see that you might be being transactional or directional in it, and it's not that kind of conversation. It's more like courtship. It's orthogonal. It's oblique, and by that I mean we have to try many different methods. We have to try many different ways, and we really have to think about the person that we're talking about. And we often have to shift something in us to make them comfortable to talk to us about a thing. And the most important, or the most effective way of doing that is start by being vulnerable. Tell them that you're scared about end of life. Talk about your fears. Talk about your fears of the afterlife, or your fears of, whatever it is. And maybe make that just one conversation.
Yeah.
It might go somewhere else, but it's a beautiful place to lead. And start to develop a level of connection around this topic. And because you want this to be a forest that you can walk into and walk around in with the people that you love in your lives. You don't want to just get an advanced care directive or a will. Those things are actually quite meaningless if they're not backed up by a healthcare proxy, a person who really understands the person's wishes. And oftentimes in a clinical setting, and advanced care directives aren't that impactful. It's humans that are impactful. So we need to walk around in the forest together.
How do you feel about death these days? Are you afraid of it? What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, no, I was in many ways until I cleaned up all of the most important relationships in my life. I forgave my mom. She's still a pain in the ass, but I forgave her. I healed my relationship with my daughters, and I wasn't who I needed. I wasn't who they needed in their childhood, at least my eldest. And so I had to do a lot of work cleaning up my relationship with her, and making her feel safe, and feeling like she trusted me. And once I got to that point, when I'd forgiven my mother, started letting my father go, and had cleaned up my relationship with my daughter, I'm a little bit more like, I certainly don't want to go anywhere. There's a lot of adventures I want to have in this plane, but I'm also a little bit like, I'm okay. I feel good about this life that I've led so far, and I'm pretty interested in what's on the other side. So,
Yeah.
And I'm completely understanding of people that don't have that experience, and I don't think everyone who feels completely okay in all of their relationships means they're not going to be afraid of death or not curious about the other side. It's completely normal to be like, no, thank you. Would like to keep this breathing system breathing. Like, that makes perfect sense. That's just me.
Yeah. I don't feel afraid anymore. I used to at one point. The only thing I worry about is leaving my kids. I have young kids, and it's the one thing that really gives me a lot of anxiety. So I do work around that. But otherwise, I've come to a lot of interesting understandings or beliefs or some kind of faith about the other side. Michael, where can we find you, and how can we reach you? And people have more questions, or they want to be part of everything that you're creating. How can we find you?
Yeah, I think the best place to find me is on EOL. That's where I'm going to spend less and less time on Facebook. We're on Instagram and all of that. Follow, I think it's EOL community on Facebook or on Instagram, and we're on Twitter. It's the same. Those places are fine, but EOL's thank you, Dar. EOL is a much better place to hang out and have these conversations. And it is a social network, and it is free, and we can have these conversations nonstop over there. And you'll run into some old friends and some new friends.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm just so enamored with everything that you do. And everything you've created out of hardship and loss and pain and so much that you've brought to the world. I think that we have to continue changing the conversation, the culture around death and dying, and that you're doing like so much of the heavy lifting, and I just appreciate it so much.
right back at you. We're lifting this up together, and what an incredible community that's been built.
Yeah.
You know, because of Reimagine, because of the work that you're doing, because of the work so many extraordinary organizations and people are doing. So it feels good to have, you know, a tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Next week is our last week of holding space until we start a new season again later in the fall. But next week we'll have Allison Gilbert here with us. And she is a wonderful author, author of Parentless Parents and Past and Present. How do we kind of keep our connections with our loved ones and hold on to them in different ways. So I'm really excited to have her. And Michael, I can't thank you enough for today. And all of you beautiful people for being here with us. Thank you guys so much. We hope to see you next week and at all the other Reimagine events. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. And I put the link for the Allison Gilbert's event, and I'm putting a few more events that we have coming up in the next few days. One today with Janet Stone, a really wonderful yogi. And we have our Dose of Togetherness Festival finale with Dr. Jessica Zitter, Hope Edelman, and Pastor Corey Kennard on Monday. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if Michael dropped off, but I really love that conversation. So thank you.
Thank you guys. See you next week. Bye.